Hi, this is Robert Wilkins, aka Basketball Tall, your BT dispatcher, bringing you news and headlines with a different flavor. Today, I have something that you need to hear, baby, because it can and is affecting us all. Talking about the Supreme Court. Listen to this from the New York Times. Headlines: Judicial crisis. Federal judges fault Supreme Court emergency orders. Dozens of sitting judges share their concerns with us about risks to the court's legitimacy as the Supreme Court released opaque orders on Trump policies. You can say that again, because if it was not for the Supreme Court, I don't think we'll be in this much chaos as we're in today. Let's read further. The Times asked federal judges questions about the Supreme Court on whether the Supreme Court has made appropriate use of the emergency docket since President Trump returned to office. You can see we have in the blue, which are the Democrats, and the red, which are the Republicans. 47 disagreed, 6 were neutral, and 12 agreed. They were asked whether they agreed or disagreed with the following. The Supreme Court has made appropriate use of the emergency docket since President Trump returned to office. More than 36 federal judges have told the New York Times that the Supreme Court's flurry of brief, opaque emergency orders in cases related to the Trump administration have left them confused about how to proceed in those matters and are hurting the judiciary's image with the public. Well, I must say that's true. The judges know best, especially those from across the country, and make such rulings, and we see it too. So I must say they got a great point there. Let's continue on. At issue are the quick turn orders the Supreme Court has issued dictating whether Trump administration policies should be left in place while they are litigated through the lower courts. That emergency docket, a growing part of the Supreme Court's work in recent years, have taken on greater importance amid the flood of litigation challenging President Trump's effort to expand executive power. While the orders are technically temporary, they have had broad practical effects, allowing the administration to deport tens of thousands of people, discharging transgender military service members, fire thousands of government workers, and slash federal spending. The striking and highly unusual critique of the nation's highest court from lower court judges reveals the degree to which litigation over Mr. Trump's agenda has created strain in the federal judicial system. I once worked for the district court on a state level as a district court juvenile officer. I understand the importance of their rulings, the honesty, the honor. That's why we call them your honor. Seems like the honor has left the building to a degree, hasn't it? Let's continue on. 65 judges responded to a Times questionnaire sent to hundreds of federal judges across the country. Of those, 47 said the Supreme Court has been mishandling its emergency docket since Mr. Trump returned to office. The judges responded to the questionnaire and spoke in interviews on the condition of anonymity so they could share their views candidly. As lower court judges are governed by a complex set of rules that include limitations on their public statements. Of the judges who responded, 28 were nominated by Republican presidents, including 10 by Mr. Trump. 37 were nominated by Democrats. While those nominated by Democrats were more critical of the Supreme Court, judges nominated by the presidents of both parties expressed concerns. In interviews, federal judges called the Supreme Court's emergency orders mystical, overly blunt, incredibly demoralizing and troubling, and a slap in the face to the district courts. One judge compared their district's current relationship with the Supreme Court to a war zone. Another said the courts were in the midst of a judicial crisis. Say that again. Talking about a judicial crisis. No ifs and buts about it. Because we see the lower courts makes rulings, and then even when there's an appeal and it goes to the appellate court and they upheld the ruling or make a ruling not in favor of the president, and then again it goes to the Supreme Court and who overturns the lower courts. Wow, that is unusual. Why? Really? The big question is, why? Let's continue on. At a hearing in September, Judge James A. Wendt Jr. of the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit said his court was out here flailing as it tried to apply vague emergency rulings from the Supreme Court that left judges in limbo. Ruling on a different case, Judge Addison D. Burroughs of the U.S. District Court for the District of Massachusetts noted that the emergency orders have not been models of clarity. The Supreme Court has so far issued emergency orders in about 20 cases involving the Trump administration's policies. In at least 7 of those orders, the majority ordered no reasoning for its decision. At public events, some Supreme Court justices have defended their use of the emergency docket as a legitimate response to the increase in swift presidential policymaking by executive order, as opposed to the legislation passed through Congress. Offering extensive reasoning or explanation, they argued, would risk locking the court into a position that might not turn out to be its final view. A spokesperson for the Supreme Court did not respond to a request for comment. Let's face it, I am a United States citizen. I was a police officer. I was a district court juvenile officer, a commissioned deputy sheriff, a juvenile justice specialist for 25 years in itself. And of those 25 years as a juvenile justice specialist, fancy name for juvenile probation and parole officers, of the last 9 of those years, I was a supervisor of 5 counties. Had interactions with every division of law enforcement, even on the federal level, including district attorneys, including district judges in all those counties. I knew the importance of being sworn in for testimony. Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? And when I say I do, I can't lie. When you go before the court, you are not to lie. You are to be honest, even if you told your buddies and friends lies. But when you get before that court, everything must be honest, must be the truth. Because when you're up there, there are just certain things you just don't know. And if you don't know it, you just don't make up and lie about it. What you don't know, but you be honest about it. My whole career, and I've locked up people, and I had to go by statutes, the law. I couldn't issue an affidavit for a detention order or anything like that without having probable cause, without making certain there's some evidence there to support it. And what I'm seeing here, working for judges, being around these judges on the state level, having great working relationships with them, including private attorneys. And then see our lower courts make rulings based on evidence. And then it gets to the Supreme Court. And they can't all agree. It's straight down party lines. Here's how I see it. Judges should not belong to a party. That's the way I see it. There should be no party. Not just that. We see what's happening here, what's hurting our country. We are where we are today. Let's be real, folks. Because the Supreme Court has given unfeathered, unlimited power to the presidency. We had 3 branches of, let's say we have 3 branches of government to keep everything in checks and balances. But right now, we're not in balance. It's crazy. It's bizarre. And right now, we're on the verge of civil war. We have our states fighting the federal level. We have an abuse, overreach, what appears, in my opinion, as a former cop, as a retired person in the from the criminal justice system, which I do understand, even though I didn't go to college to be a lawyer, but I've studied a lot of law because that was the field I was in, criminal justice. And I'm a lawman for life. Even though retired from that field, I am a lawman for life, always seeking justice, always seeking accountability, always seeking truth and honesty, because that's what it's based on, isn't it? The facts, that's true. So what we're seeing today, guys, and if this goes darker and it appears that we're heading in that direction, I blame the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court should not have given unlimited power to anyone, because we lose our balance there. Haven't you noticed? So if, and that's a big if right now, if we survive what's going on in our country now, if the country can continue by the rule of law, and if that day comes where we no longer have the people in power that we have right now, there's got to be some correction, some big changes here. There's got to be things put in place where we never have this situation ever again. You see, folks, I understand a lot of us get fed up with things that we see and we don't like. We all feel that. Just because, one person may be blue or red, let's face it, nobody is 100% anything. I've always considered myself, when I was a Democrat, I've always considered myself a conservative Democrat. We act today that only Republicans can be conservative. But now, this is not the conservative movement that once was. This is different. This is way overreach. And our Supreme Court gave it to them, gave it to him. None of us ever thought we'd be in a situation like this. It didn't matter who took the helm. But what if that person that got such a position didn't have the same morals that we all have been accustomed to? And boy, you're talking about creating a divide. And you know what, folks? And that divide, let's be real, a lot of it is down race lines also, because this is the United States. The United States has always been based on race. I would say probably prior to the last 10 years or whatever, we've seen unity in this country like we've never seen before, really. Because after the civil rights movement of the 60s, came the 70s, the great migration of integration across this land. Yeah, there were some fights. I went through that myself, not me personally, but well, yeah, I did go through that personally when I had to walk through that community every day to go to junior high in the 7th grade. That was horror. Then 9th grade, even though there was war at school, a huge race riot, but after that 9th grade year, people started getting along like we've never seen before. And we can't say that across demographic lines, every state, because the progression for each state has been different. In the South, because the color divide is so much deeper than other parts of the country, people have different experiences as far as their relationships. But now we've got some people that are really pushing that race card. And I know many of you watching this say, no, they're not. It's based on where you live at. I'm an ex-cop. I have some experiences, and I can tell you that I'm not going to tell you. But I can tell you this right here. I walked through the valley of death. I've walked through that jungle as a police officer and even as a child. And here we are. When people say make America great again, what are they talking about? Because see, different people taking it different ways. Some people will say, yeah, bring back, get these prices down, you know. Then other people will look at it as, well, yeah, all this, this gay transgender stuff, we got to stop all that. Then other people will look back as, yeah, we need to put them back in their place. They're getting too big in this country. There's too many of them, they rise into power. It's kind of like, when Pharaoh, look back in the days of old in the Bible, in the Old Testament, when you had the Israelites was in captivity by Egypt, because their numbers grew so large, they outnumbered the Egyptians, and Pharaoh felt that they had to do something about that. They were in slavery. When you look at that, the Hebrew people back then, when Moses freed them from Pharaoh, and then you look at the slave movement, the Atlantic slave trade movement in the Americas, and especially in the United States with slavery. And the number of years, you can see a very similarity to the Hebrews back in the day of old under Pharaoh and compared to those slaves in the United States. There are very similarity of how long each one were in slavery. It's unbelievable. But let's be real. We have good and bad forces on this planet, and everybody's not pleased with, things, especially when it comes to race. Let's face it. There's God and there's Satan. And what the Bible tells us is that the prince of this world, who is Satan, seeking and roaming who he can devour and destroy. He's the master of manipulation and lies. Read 2 Thessalonians, 2nd chapter, verses 1 through 12. It talks about the lawless one. It talks about who's considered the Antichrist, who lies to so many and manipulate them, and they too will perish with that lawless one and those that support him. Read it for yourself. I'm not making it up. I'm not trying to scare anybody, but let's be real here. The Supreme Court has done us an injustice. And how are we going to get us back on track where the law values? Because for the last couple of hundred of years, this country has survived because of its laws, its Constitution, which is a law. Robert Wilkins, your BT dispatcher. Go ahead, give me a thumbs up. And if you like what I'm saying, go ahead and subscribe, because I will continue to bring you headline news, commentary with a different flavor, and other stories of value to open our eyes and make us think about what we're doing, what we're saying, and where we're going. Because my job has always been about to protect the public, but also make certain that we all live in peace and harmony and respect for one another.